My sister left me $11.6 million after she passed away. I planned to keep the inheritance secret and surprise my husband at our 39th wedding anniversary dinner, but the bank officer looked at the screen and said, "Ma'am, there may be a problem with our records, but it shows here that you've been divorced for 11 months. I froze, then decided not to tell my husband anything. I only did one thing. "Thank you for being here on Silent Revenge with Phoenix. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me, what country or city are you watching from today?" I read every single one. Quick note, this story includes fictional elements woven in for entertainment and reflection. Names and settings are coincidental, but the message inside is one I hope stays with you long after it ends. The radio came on the moment I turned the key. I did not recognize the song at first. It had been years since I heard it on anything other than the old station Richard used to keep on during long drives. But by the second measure, I knew. It was the same song that had been playing in the car the night we drove back from our honeymoon 39 years ago. Rain on the windshield, empty highway, Richard singing softly in the dark, thinking I was asleep. I turned it off. Then I sat in the parking lot of First Coastal Bank on Abercorn Street and looked at the steering wheel for a long time. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 67 years old. I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and I have lived in the same house on Habersham Street for 31 of the 39 years I have been married to Richard Whitmore. I spent 22 years teaching school, retired 4 years ago, and had expected the rest of my life to be, if not exciting, at least quiet. My garden, my books, Sunday afternoons with my closest friend, Helen Parker, and Richard, who I believed until this morning was still my husband. My older sister Carol passed away 6 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast the way that particular cruelty tends to. Carol had never married, never had children, and had spent 40 years building a small but careful life, a rental property in Bluffton, a brokerage account she added to every month without fail, and a beach cottage outside of Tybee Island that had been in our family since before I was born. When the estate attorney called me 3 weeks after the funeral, he told me the total value of what Carol had left behind came to approximately $11.6 million. All of it. Every last piece left to me. I had not told Richard the number yet. I told myself I was waiting until the paperwork was finalized. That was true as far as it went. But if I am being honest, there was another reason. Something in me had been hesitating. A small, quiet unease I had not yet looked at directly. The kind that sits in the corner of a room and waits. I came to the bank that Monday morning to begin the process of transferring Carol's brokerage account into my name. It was supposed to take 45 minutes. I had brought a book. The account manager who helped me was a woman named Patricia, somewhere in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the careful, practiced manner of someone who has delivered difficult news before. She pulled up the account information, began the verification process, and then went very still. She looked at her screen, then at me, then at her screen again. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, and her voice had shifted into something slower and more deliberate. "Before we proceed, I need to flag something in our system." She folded her hands on the desk. "According to the records we have on file, your marital status is listed as divorced, finalized approximately 11 months ago." I did not move. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere behind me, a child was asking his mother a question about something. Patricia was watching me with the expression of a woman who very much did not want to be the one saying what she was saying. "Is it possible," she said carefully, "that there's been some kind of clerical error on our end?" "It's possible," I said. My voice came out even. I was mildly surprised by that. "Would you like to take a moment?" she asked. "No," I said. "Thank you, Patricia. I think I need to make a phone call before we go any further." She nodded and slid a printed summary across the desk toward me, the marital status line highlighted in yellow. I folded it in half without looking at it again, put it in my purse, and stood up. I walked through the lobby. I pushed open the glass door. The August heat hit me like a wall, the way Savannah heat always does, thick and total, like stepping into something rather than somewhere. I got in my car. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt in those first few minutes was not grief exactly, and it was not rage. It was something quieter and more disorienting than either of those things. It was the sensation of a floor that you have walked across every day for 39 years, suddenly no longer being where you believed it to be. Richard had kissed me on the forehead that morning before he left for his walk. He had asked if I wanted him to pick up anything from the market on his way back. I sat in the parking lot on Abercorn Street, and I thought about that kiss. Then I took my phone out of my purse and I called Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been the Whitmore family attorney for 16 years. He was 61, methodical in the way that only truly careful people are, and he had a voice that did not change register, regardless of what you said to him. He picked up on the second ring. "Daniel," I said, "I need you to check something for me right now. I need you to look up whether there's a divorce filing in Chatham County under my name." I paused. "And I need you to do it before I drive anywhere." There was a silence on the other end, not the silence of surprise, the silence of a man who has immediately understood that something is seriously wrong. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. "Stay where you are." I set the phone in my lap and looked out through the windshield at the parking lot. A young mother was loading groceries into her trunk. A man in a postal uniform was eating a sandwich on a bench near the entrance. The world was going about its business in the most ordinary way imaginable. My phone rang 8 minutes later. "Margaret," Daniel said, "I need you to come to my office." Daniel Brooks had been practicing family and estate law in Savannah for 34 years, and his office on Bull Street looked exactly the way you would expect an office like that to look. Dark wood bookshelves, a grandfather clock in the corner that ticked loud enough to fill any silence, 2 leather chairs across from his desk worn smooth at the armrests from the weight of people sitting in them during the worst moments of their lives. I'd been in those chairs before, when my father passed, when Carol needed help with her estate planning 2 years ago. The chair on the left was the one I always chose without thinking about it. I chose it again now. Daniel set a manila folder on the desk between us and did not open it right away. That was one of the things I had always trusted about him. He never rushed toward the hard part. "I pulled the filing directly from the Chatham County Clerk's database," he said. "Margaret, the divorce is real. It was finalized 11 months ago, uncontested." I looked at the folder. "Show me." He opened it. The petition was there. The marital settlement agreement, a waiver of appearance signed in my name. And at the bottom of the settlement page on the line marked "Petitioner's Spouse" was my signature. I recognized it immediately, the slight leftward lean on the capital M, the way I had always connected the A and the R without lifting the pen. 30 years of signing report cards and permission slips and mortgage documents had worn that signature into my hand like a groove. "That's my signature," I said. "Yes," Daniel said, "but I never signed divorce papers." "No," he said. "I don't believe you did." I pressed my fingertips flat against the edge of the desk. The leather was cool and firm beneath my hands, and I focused on that for a moment. The solidity of it. All court correspondence was routed to a commercial mailbox registered on Whitaker Street. Daniel continued. "The box was opened 14 months ago under your name, Margaret, but the contact email on the account belongs to a server I have not yet been able to trace. You never received a single notice. Richard set up a mailbox in my name," I said, not a question. "That is what the evidence suggests." I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a trolley passed on Bull Street, the recorded tour narration drifting faintly through the window glass. Something about Savannah's history, something about the squares. 20 years ago, Richard had slipped on a patch of ice in the driveway in January and bruised 3 ribs. Nothing serious, the doctor had said, but painful enough that he could not drive or lift anything for nearly 3 weeks. I had registered for a watercolor class at the Savannah College of Art and Design that winter. I had been on the wait list for 2 years. The class ran Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and it started the same week Richard got hurt. I withdrew before the first session. I did not tell him I had been registered. I just quietly called the program coordinator, apologized for the late notice, and spent the next 3 weeks making sure Richard had everything he needed. Lunch ready when he woke up, his library books renewed online, his coffee exactly the way he liked it, 2 creams, no sugar, poured into the blue ceramic mug he had used every morning for 15 years. One afternoon, he had reached over from his recliner and taken my hand while I was reading aloud to him from the newspaper. "You are the finest person I have ever known," he said. I had believed him. I believed him the way you believe something that has been proven to you over decades, the way you believe in the floor under your feet. "Margaret." Daniel's voice brought me back. He was watching me carefully the way he always did when he was measuring how much a person could hold at once. "There's one more thing I need to ask you. I need you to think back to approximately 14 to 16 months ago. Is there any period of time during which you signed documents you did not read fully? Anything Richard may have presented as routine paperwork?" My stomach tightened. Not slowly, all at once. "Yes," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. 14 months ago, I had surgery, my shoulder." Daniel picked up his pen. "Tell me everything you remember," he said. I looked down at my hands in my lap. The wedding ring on my left hand caught the light from the window and threw a small bright circle onto the ceiling above Daniel's desk. I had worn that ring for 39 years without taking it off once, not during the surgery, not during recovery, not on any of the mornings Richard had kissed my forehead and asked if I needed anything from the market. I curled my fingers inward until the ring was hidden inside my closed fist. 14 months ago, I said. Richard came to my hospital room with a folder. 14 months ago, I fell down the back staircase of our house on Habersham Street. It was a Tuesday morning in June, early before the heat had fully settled in. I was carrying a basket of laundry and missed the second-to-last step. I went down hard on my right shoulder and heard something that I will not try to describe accurately, because there are sounds you hear with your body rather than your ears, and those are the ones that stay with you. The surgery was the following morning. A torn rotator cuff, the orthopedic surgeon explained, with enough additional damage to the surrounding tissue that they needed to go in and repair it properly rather than manage it conservatively. I was 66 years old. My body, the surgeon said, with the particular brand of clinical kindness that good doctors develop over decades, would need time to forgive this. Richard was there when I came out of the anesthesia. He was sitting in the chair beside the bed, and when I opened my eyes, he reached over and put his hand on my arm. "You gave me a scare," he said. His voice was rough in a way that made me think he had been worried. I was grateful for that. I remember being grateful. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The pain medication they had me on was a combination I had never taken before, and it made the edges of everything soft and unreliable, the way a photograph looks when the lens is not quite focused. I could hold a conversation. I could answer questions. But I was not, as I understand it now, operating with anything close to my full capacity. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Richard came in with a folder tucked under his arm. He was dressed as though he had come from somewhere, a collared shirt, the gray one I had always liked on him. He pulled the chair close to the bed and set the folder on the tray table in front of me. "I am sorry to do this now," he said, "but the insurance company needs updated authorization paperwork before they will process the surgical claim. Something about the new fiscal year and the way our policy is structured. If we miss the window, we are looking at resubmitting everything from scratch." He opened the folder. There were multiple pages tabbed with small yellow sticky arrows pointing to the signature lines, the kind of arrows that say, "Sign here," without requiring you to read anything above them. "It is just administrative," Richard said. "Authorization and release, you know how they are." He held the pen out to me. I took it. My right arm was immobilized in a sling, so I signed with my left hand slower than usual, the letters a little uneven from the medication and the awkward angle. Richard guided each page in front of me, pointed to the arrows, and I signed. It took less than 4 minutes. "Thank you," he said. He closed the folder and tucked it back under his arm. Then he leaned over and kissed my forehead. "Rest now. I will be back tonight with the good soup from Clary's." He brought the soup. I ate half of it and fell asleep before 7 o'clock. I had not thought about that folder again until this moment. Sitting across from Daniel, I watched his pen move across the legal pad as I spoke. He did not interrupt. He did not react visibly. He simply wrote, and when I finished, he set the pen down parallel to the pad's edge with the precise, deliberate motion of a man organizing his thoughts before he speaks. "The documents you signed in the hospital," he said, "almost certainly included pages from the divorce petition and the marital settlement agreement. The signatures would have been obtained under conditions that Georgia law recognizes as lack of capacity, meaning your ability to understand what you were signing was materially compromised by the medication. Additionally, the routing of all court correspondence to a mailbox you never authorized constitutes fraud upon the court." He paused. "What Richard did is not just a civil matter, Margaret. It crosses into criminal territory." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked through the silence. "Can it be undone?" I asked. "The divorce judgment can be challenged under Georgia Code Section 91160, Daniel said. "We file a motion to set aside the judgment based on fraud. Given what you have just described and assuming the hospital records confirm your medication levels, at the time of signing, I believe we have strong grounds." He looked at me steadily. "But I need you to do something difficult in the meantime. I need you to go home tonight and behave as though nothing has changed. Richard cannot know that you have been here." I thought about the way Richard had kissed my forehead that same morning, the easy, practiced warmth of it. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough to understand exactly what we are dealing with," Daniel said. "There is more here than a divorce filing, Margaret. I can feel it. And I need you to trust me while I find out what it is." I picked up my purse from the floor beside the chair and stood. "I have trusted the wrong person for a long time," I said. "I think I can manage trusting the right one for a little while longer." There are things you cannot say to a lawyer, not because a lawyer will judge you, but because a lawyer will respond to everything with measured professional calm. And sometimes what you need is someone who has known you long enough to understand what a thing costs before you have finished explaining what the thing is. I drove from Daniel's office to Helen Parker's house on Jones Street without calling ahead. I had not eaten anything since 6 that morning, and it was nearly 2 in the afternoon, but I was not hungry. I was something else entirely. Something I did not yet have the right word for. Helen answered the door before I had finished knocking. She took one look at my face and stepped back to let me in. "Sit down," she said. "I will make coffee." Helen Parker and I had been friends for 31 years, since the year our daughters were in the same second-grade classroom at Savannah Christian Preparatory School, and we had been assigned to organize the spring fundraiser together. We'd spent 3 weeks arguing pleasantly about everything from table decorations to ticket pricing, and by the end of it, we'd understood that we were going to be friends for a long time. Helen had spent 22 years as an internal auditor for a regional banking group before she retired. She had a mind that moved in straight lines fast and without sentiment, and she had never once in 3 decades told me what I wanted to hear, when what I needed to hear was something else. That was the quality I had come for. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything. All of it, from the bank on Abercorn Street to Daniel's office on Bull Street, without stopping and without softening any of it. Helen sat across from me with both hands wrapped around her mug and did not say a word until I finished. Then she set the mug down. "Do you have access to your joint bank statements?" she asked. "The past 4 years." "I can pull them from the online account," I said. "Then pull them now," she said. "Use my laptop." That was Helen. No gasping, no hand over the mouth, no drawn-out expressions of disbelief that would require me to comfort her while I was the one falling apart. She simply identified the next useful thing and moved toward it. I logged into the joint account on her laptop while she refilled both our mugs. We sat side by side at her kitchen table, the afternoon light coming in flat and golden through the window over the sink, and we went through 4 years of transaction history, line by line. It took us a little over an hour. Helen found the first payment to VC Property Management dated almost 3 years back in the records. $4,200 listed under the category of property maintenance. She highlighted it without comment and kept scrolling. She found the second one 6 weeks later. $3,800. Same vendor, same category. By the time we reached the end of the 4th year, she had highlighted 31 separate transactions. Helen opened a fresh page in the notepad she kept by the telephone and added up the figures by hand, the way she always did when she wanted to be certain. Her handwriting was small and precise, each number sitting exactly where she placed it. She turned the notepad toward me. The total was $276,400. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like something else, like a measurement, like the precise distance between who I had believed Richard to be and who he actually was. VC Property Management, I said. Do you know how to find out who owns it? Already looking, Helen said. She had her reading glasses on now and was typing with the focused, unhurried speed of someone who has spent decades following money through documents. Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry, give me 2 minutes. I gave her 2 minutes. Registered in Chatham County, she said. Principal owner listed as Vanessa Cole. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Mean anything to you? My chest tightened the way a fist tightens, slowly, deliberately, until there is no give left. Richard introduced her to me 2 years ago, I said. He called her our insurance consultant. Helen held my gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the screen. I am going to need Daniel's number, she said. And I am going to need you to let me make some calls tonight that you probably should not hear directly. She pulled the notepad back toward her and picked up her pen. Margaret, I want you to understand something before we go any further. What I am looking at here is not a husband who made a bad decision. This is a pattern. This was built deliberately over time by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. My coffee had gone cold. I wrapped both hands around the mug anyway because I needed something to hold. How much more is there? I asked. Helen looked at the screen. Comment any number below, just let me know you are still here with me on Silent Revenge with Phoenix. Because what I am about to tell you about Vanessa Cole is the part that still makes my voice catch every time. A small note, what follows, contains fictional elements, shaped for reflection and deeper understanding. If that is not for you, this is a gentle moment to step away. The first time I met Vanessa Cole, she shook my hand with both of hers. It was a Friday evening 2 years ago. Richard had mentioned that morning that he had invited our new insurance consultant to dinner, someone he had connected with through a professional referral, someone he thought we should both meet, given that we were at the age where consolidating and reviewing our policies made good sense. I had made pot roast. I had set the table in the dining room rather than the kitchen because we had a guest. Vanessa Cole was 43 years old, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who understood that presentation was a form of argument, and she had the kind of confident, unhurried manner that made you feel within the first 10 minutes that she was very good at her job. She asked thoughtful questions about our retirement timeline. She complimented the pot roast. When she left, Richard walked her to her car, and I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes and thinking that she seemed perfectly competent and that I was glad Richard was finally taking our insurance portfolio seriously. I had not thought much about her after that. I was thinking about her now sitting across from Daniel in his office on a Tuesday morning, while Helen sat beside me with a folder of printed documents resting on her knees. Daniel had been on the phone with his investigator until past midnight. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me the way he always did when the news required a moment of steadiness before the words. Richard and Vanessa Cole have been in a relationship for just over 2 years, he said. The timeline begins approximately 3 months before he invited her to your home for dinner. The pot roast, the dining room table, the way she had shaken my hand with both of hers. I kept my face still. My hands were flat on my thighs, and I pressed them down until I could feel the fabric of my slacks pulling taut across my knees. There is something else, Helen said. She opened the folder and slid a photograph across Daniel's desk toward me. It was a picture taken inside a restaurant. The lighting was warm and low, the kind of lighting that restaurants use when they want you to feel that the evening is special. Richard was sitting across a small table from Vanessa. He was laughing at something she had said, his head tilted back slightly, completely at ease, in the way that I had not seen him be completely at ease in longer than I could immediately calculate. The date stamp in the corner of the photograph read the 14th of March. My birthday is the 14th of March. Last year, on the evening of my 66th birthday, Richard had called me at 7:30. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a small chocolate cake I had picked up from the bakery on Broughton Street, because he had said that morning he was not sure he could get home before 9 and I should not wait on dinner. He had sounded genuinely apologetic on the phone, tired even. "I am so sorry, Maggie," he had said. "This ran longer than I expected. I will make it up to you this weekend, I promise." I had told him it was fine. I had eaten 2 slices of cake and watched the evening news and gone to bed. Now I was looking at a photograph of where he had actually been. Something moved through my chest. Not a sharp thing, a slow thing. The kind of pain that does not announce itself loudly but simply occupies more and more space until there is very little room left for anything else. "The townhouse," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. "Daniel mentioned a property in Charleston. My investigator confirmed it yesterday," Daniel said. "Richard has been paying rent on a townhouse in the Harleston Village neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina, for 14 months. Personal belongings have been moved there, gradually, clothing, books, a number of items from his home office." He paused. "Neighbors in the building know him as Vanessa's fiancé." The word landed in the room and stayed there. Fiancé. 39 years. 39 years of the same kitchen, the same driveway, the same side of the bed. 39 years of building something that I had believed with the particular confidence of someone who has never had reason to question it was real. "She knew about the divorce filing," Helen said quietly. She pulled another page from the folder. "The commercial mailbox that received all the court correspondence. The registration traces back to an email account associated with Vanessa. She did not just know Richard was planning to leave you. She was part of the machinery that made sure you would not find out until he was ready." I looked at the photograph one more time. Then I turned it face down on the desk. "What do we do next?" I asked. Daniel picked up his pen. "We find out exactly what Richard is waiting for," he said. "Because a man who goes to this much trouble does not do it without a reason, and I do not yet believe we have found all of it. People who build traps are patient in a way that is difficult to recognize from the inside. I had spent 39 years watching Richard move through the world with what I had always taken for steadiness. He was not a man who rushed. He thought before he spoke. He planned ahead in the practical, unglamorous way of someone who understood that most things worth having required time. I had loved that quality in him. I had trusted it the way you trust a load-bearing wall. It had not occurred to me until this moment that those same qualities could be turned in the opposite direction. Daniel had asked Helen to step out for a few minutes. She had gone without comment, taking her folder and her reading glasses, closing the door behind her with the quiet precision of someone who understood the weight of what was being asked. Daniel opened a second folder on his desk. This one was thicker than the first. "The marital settlement agreement Richard had you sign in the hospital," he said, "contains a financial disclosure schedule. Every asset belonging to both parties is supposed to be listed on that schedule. It is a legal requirement under Georgia divorce law." He turned the folder toward me and pointed to a page near the back. "Your joint investment accounts are here. The house on Habersham Street is here. Richard's retirement accounts are here." He moved his finger to a blank space near the bottom of the page. "Your family investment fund is not here." I leaned forward. The blank space he was pointing to had a heading above it, a line that read, "Additional marital assets." And beneath the heading, there was nothing. Not a zero, not a dash. Simply nothing, as though the space had been prepared and then deliberately left empty. "That fund is worth approximately $4.2 million. Daniel said. "It was established jointly during your marriage, which means it qualifies as a marital asset under Georgia law and was required by statute to be disclosed in the settlement agreement. Its absence is not an oversight, Margaret. An oversight does not leave a formatted blank space. Someone made a decision not to fill that line in." My throat tightened. I swallowed carefully. "He planned to come back for it," I said. "That is my assessment," Daniel said. "You mentioned to him at some point that you were considering liquidating a portion of the fund when you turned 68. Simplifying your financial picture, you said. Richard remembered that. He has been waiting for you to initiate that process. Once the funds were moved into a more accessible account, he intended to surface the divorce, present the omission in the settlement as a clerical error requiring renegotiation, and use the resulting legal confusion to extract as much as possible, while you were still absorbing the shock of everything else. The grandfather clock ticked. Outside on Bull Street, someone was laughing at something. The sound drifted up through the window and then was gone. "He does not know about Carol's estate," I said. It was not a question, but Daniel answered it as one. "There is no indication he has any accurate information about the size of the inheritance. Based on what his investigator was able to determine, Richard believes you may have received somewhere in the range of a few $100,000. A meaningful sum, but not one that would significantly alter the calculation he has already made." I sat with that for a moment. $11.6 million, structured entirely as inherited property received after the date of the fraudulent divorce filing, completely outside the reach of any marital asset claim Richard might attempt to make. Carol, who had never liked Richard and had never pretended otherwise, had left me something that was mine in every legal sense of the word, and in every other sense as well. "I want you to understand something clearly," Daniel said. His voice was even and careful the way it always was when he was about to say something that mattered. "The $11.6 million is yours. It is protected. Richard cannot touch it, cannot claim it, cannot negotiate for a portion of it. The question now is how we handle the $4.2 million and the fraudulent omission in the settlement agreement." He paused. "And the question of timing." "Timing," I said. "Richard does not know that you know any of this. That is an advantage, Margaret, and it is one we should not spend carelessly." He folded his hands on the desk. "I would like to begin filing the motion to set aside the divorce judgment this week, quietly through channels Richard is unlikely to monitor. While that is in process, I want to freeze the family investment fund so that no withdrawals can be made without both parties present and counsel notified." "And Richard," I said. "When does he find out?" Daniel looked at me steadily. "When you decide," he said. "Not before." Something shifted in my chest then. Not the slow, occupying pain from the day before. Something different. Something that had edges and weight and direction. I had spent 39 years being the person who withdrew from the watercolor class without saying a word, who ate birthday cake alone and said it was fine, who signed papers in a hospital bed because the man holding the pen had said, "Trust me." I looked at Daniel across the desk. "Then I want to choose the moment carefully," I said. "I want him to be certain he has won before he finds out that he has not." Daniel picked up his pen and wrote something at the top of a fresh page. "Tell me," he said, "when Richard is most likely to feel certain." The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. I came home that Tuesday evening and made dinner. Chicken and rice the way Richard liked it, with the rosemary from the pot on the back porch that I had been tending for 11 years. I set the table. I poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. When Richard came in from his afternoon walk and asked how my day had been, I told him I had visited Helen and that we had gone through some of Carol's paperwork together. He nodded and sat down and said the chicken smelled good. I said thank you and passed him the bread. That was how it went every evening for 2 weeks. The ordinary machinery of a shared life continuing to operate, each gear turning the next, producing the same output it always had. Dinner, television, the 10 o'clock news, Richard's reading glasses left on the arm of his chair, my book on the nightstand. the particular rhythm of two people who have lived together so long that their habits have fused into a single unremarkable routine. What Richard did not know was that during those same 2 weeks, Daniel had quietly filed the motion to set aside the divorce judgment with the Chatham County Superior Court. He had frozen the family investment fund through the account's custodial manager, a procedural step that Daniel had structured to require my authorization as primary account holder, and that generated no notification to Richard. And Helen had continued pulling on every financial thread she could find methodically, without stopping the way she'd always worked. It was Helen who found what Vanessa had done with the money. She called me on a Thursday morning while Richard was out. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my second cup of coffee, watching a cardinal work its way along the fence at the back of the yard, and when I saw Helen's name on the screen, I stepped into the hallway before I answered. "I need you to sit down," Helen said. "Tell me," I said. I did not sit down. Vanessa Cole has a judgment lien against her from a civil court case in Beaufort County, South Carolina. $31,000 unpaid. She also carries credit card debt across 4 accounts totaling somewhere in the range of $90,000. And there is a second lien, this one from a private lender for $268,000 secured against a property she owned in Bluffton that she sold 18 months ago. Helen paused. The Bluffton sale did not cover the full lien. The remainder, roughly $190,000, was still outstanding as of 8 months ago. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. 31,000, 90,000. 190,000. The numbers arranged themselves in a column in my mind and produced a sum that sat very close to the total Richard had transferred to VC Property Management over 34 months. "He paid her debts," I said. "A significant portion of them," Helen said. "The townhouse in Charleston, the one he has been paying rent on for 14 months, the lease is in Vanessa's name only. Richard has no legal interest in that property. No ownership, no tenancy rights, nothing. If she chose to change the locks tomorrow, he would have no recourse." I stood in the hallway and looked at the framed photograph on the wall across from me. Richard and I at Tybee Island, taken the summer our daughter turned 16. Richard had his arm around my shoulders, and we were both squinting into the sun and laughing at something neither of us could probably remember now. "He thinks she is building a life with him," I said. "He thinks a great many things that are not accurate," Helen said. That evening, Richard came into the kitchen while I was washing up after dinner and leaned against the counter beside me. He had his phone in his hand, and his expression was the careful, neutral one he wore when he was about to say something he had already rehearsed. "I noticed the access on the joint savings account has been modified," he said. "Did you change something on the banking side?" I turned off the tap and dried my hands on the dish towel. "Daniel suggested I consolidate a few things while Carol's estate is being finalized," I said. "Just tidying up the accounts. You know how paperwork multiplies after someone passes." Richard watched me for a moment. His jaw moved slightly the way it did when he was processing something he did not entirely accept. "I could help with that," he said. "Handle the administrative side. Save you the trouble." I folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. "That's very kind," I said, "but Daniel has it well in hand." Richard smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. I smiled back. Later that night, lying in the dark, listening to Richard's breathing slow and deepen into sleep beside me, I thought about what Helen had said. He thinks a great many things that are not accurate. I stared at the ceiling and felt something I had not expected to feel in the middle of all of this. Almost sorry for him. Almost. Helen called on a Wednesday morning, 4 days before our anniversary. I was in the garden cutting back the Confederate jasmine along the side fence, the kind of work that keeps your hands busy while your mind goes wherever it needs to go. I had been spending more time in the garden those past 2 weeks than I had in years. There was something clarifying about it. The way a plant either responds to care or it does not. The way the soil tells you the truth without being asked. I pulled off my glove and answered on the second ring. "He has a suitcase in the trunk of his car," Helen said. "A large one." I saw it this morning when he pulled into the gas station on Drayton Street. He did not see me. I set my pruning shears on the fence post. How full? I asked. Full enough that he had to lean on it to close it, she said. I stood in the garden and looked at the jasmine. 3 weeks ago, I had believed that the most complicated thing in my immediate future was the paperwork involved in transferring Carol's estate. Now, I was standing in the dirt in my gardening gloves, calculating how many days I had before my husband of 39 years executed a plan he had spent 2 years building. He invited people for Saturday, I said. He told me he wanted to do something small for the anniversary, a few family members, a nice dinner at home. Helen was quiet for a moment. Margaret, you understand what that dinner actually is? Yes, I said. I do. Richard intended to use the anniversary dinner as his stage. The family gathered around the table, the occasion weighted with 39 years of shared history, and then the announcement. The divorce that had already been finalized for 11 months. The documents. The done deal delivered in front of witnesses who would spend the rest of the evening managing their own shock, leaving me no room and no allies, and no ability to respond with anything other than visible devastation. It was well constructed. I could see that clearly in the same dispassionate way you can admire the engineering of something built to work against you. I want you to cancel it, Helen said. Tell Richard you are not feeling well. Tell him anything. No, I said. Margaret. He built the stage, I said. I am not going to take it down for him. I am going to let him walk onto it. Helen exhaled. It was the sound she made when she had already anticipated the answer and had not liked it even before she heard it. I called Daniel that afternoon. He confirmed that everything was in place. The motion to set aside the judgment had been filed and was moving through the court. The investment fund was frozen. The documentation we had assembled over the past 3 weeks, the financial records, the investigator's report, the hospital paperwork, the mailbox registration, the photographs was organized and ready. You are certain about Saturday? Daniel asked. I am certain, I said. That evening, I went to the closet and took out the dress Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was a deep blue, the color of the ocean at Tybee in late afternoon, and it still fit the way it had 9 years ago. I hung it on the back of the bedroom door where I would see it in the morning. Richard came in while I was doing that. He stopped in the doorway. The blue dress, he said. Special occasion. 39 years, I said. Seems worth dressing for. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more like the expression of a man who has been so focused on where he is going that he has momentarily forgotten what he is leaving behind. It was gone in less than a second. It is going to be a memorable evening, he said. He had no idea how right he was. The table looked beautiful. I had said it myself that afternoon, the good china we had received as a wedding gift 39 years ago, and used perhaps a dozen times since the linen tablecloth Carol had sent us from Charleston, the year we moved into the Habersham Street house, the low arrangement of white dahlias I had cut from the back garden. Richard had offered to help, and I had told him I wanted to do it myself. He had gone to watch the evening news in the other room, and I had stood at that table for a long moment, my hands resting on the back of a chair, looking at what 39 years looked like when it was laid out on linen and good china. Then I had finished setting the table and gone upstairs to put on the blue dress. Guests began arriving at 6, Richard's younger brother and his wife. Our daughter was traveling for work and could not make it down from Atlanta in time, which I had not tried to change. 2 of our neighbors from Habersham Street who had known us for 20 years. Richard's college friend from Athens, who drove down every year for what Richard had billed as a low-key anniversary dinner among people we loved. Helen arrived at 6:15, which was 7 minutes later than I had asked her to arrive, and she squeezed my hand at the door without saying anything, which told me everything I needed to know about how she was feeling. Daniel came at 6:30. Richard shook his hand at the door with the easy confidence of a man who did not yet understand why the family attorney had been invited to an anniversary dinner. The meal was good. Roast chicken, green beans from the garden, the buttermilk biscuits that Richard's brother always asked for when he came to Savannah. Wine was poured. Someone told a story about a trip they had taken. Richard laughed at the right moments and refilled glasses and sat at the head of the table with the settled, proprietary ease of a man who believed the evening was proceeding exactly as he had planned. I watched him across the length of the table and thought about the suitcase in the trunk of his car, packed and waiting in the dark of the garage. He waited until the plates had been cleared. Then he set his wine glass down, pushed back his chair slightly, and stood up. "I want to say something," he said. "While everyone who matters to us is in the same room." The table quieted. Richard's brother smiled. The neighbor from across the street leaned forward slightly. These were people who had known us for decades, people who had been to our daughter's wedding and stood beside us at funerals and shared the long, unremarkable texture of a life lived in the same neighborhood for 30 years. They were expecting a toast, a sentimental recollection. 39 years of gratitude delivered in the warm, slightly embarrassed manner of a man who does not usually say tender things out loud. Richard looked directly at me. "Margaret," he said, "there is something I should have addressed a long time ago, something that affects both of us and that I think deserves to be spoken honestly in front of the people who care about us." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. My chest did not tighten. My hands did not tremble. I felt something move through me that was perfectly still at its center, the way the eye of a storm is perfectly still. And I understood in that moment that I had been moving toward this chair at this table, in this dress for the past 3 weeks, without knowing it was where I was going. "Richard," I said. My voice was quiet enough that the table went completely silent to hear it. "Are you about to tell everyone that we have been divorced for 11 months?" The document in his hand did not move. Richard did not move. The color left his face in the particular way that happens when the body understands something before the mind has caught up to it. Richard's brother said, "I'm sorry, what?" I looked at Daniel. He nodded once and rose from his chair, setting his briefcase on the cleared corner of the table and opening it. "I would like to show everyone something," I said. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt as I laid each document on the table was not rage, and it was not satisfaction, and it was not grief. It was the specific, grounded calm of a woman who has spent 3 weeks making certain that every fact in her possession is accurate and every paper in her hand is real. The divorce filing, the hospital authorization documents with my left-handed signature on the lines Richard had marked with yellow arrows, the commercial mailbox registration, the 31 transactions paid to VC Property Management totaling $276,400, the photograph from the restaurant dated the 14th of March, the lease agreement for the townhouse in Charleston's Harleston Village neighborhood, signed by Vanessa Cole alone. I set each one down. The table was very quiet. Richard's hand, still holding his own document, dropped to his sides. "How long?" he said. His voice had gone flat in a way I had never heard from him before. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to make sure you could not undo any of it," I said. He looked at the documents spread across the linen tablecloth and the good china and the white dahlias, and I watched him understand that the stage he had built and rehearsed and timed so carefully had been standing on nothing at all. "And Carol's estate?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What happens to the money?" I looked at him steadily. $11.6 million, I said. "Every cent of it mine, every cent of it protected. You spent 2 years preparing a life without me, Richard. You finished building it just before I received the one thing you wanted most and could never touch." The room held its breath. Richard set his document on the table without unfolding it. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the front door with the careful, deliberate steps of a man who understands that every person in the room is watching him and that there is nothing left to say. The front door opened. The front door closed. I looked at the white dahlias in the center of the table. I am sorry," I said to the room, "that this was not the evening any of you expected." Richard's brother reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Are you all right?" he asked. I thought about that for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I think I finally am." Richard drove to Charleston that night. I know because he did not come back. Not that night, not the next morning, not in the days that followed. The garage sat empty. His reading glasses stayed on the arm of his chair where he had left them before the guests arrived, and for 3 days I walked past them without moving them, not out of sentiment, but because I was not yet sure what category of object they belonged to now. I learned later through Daniel what Richard found when he arrived at the Harleston Village townhouse sometime after midnight. The lights were off. A significant portion of Vanessa's clothing and personal belongings were gone. The key Richard had kept on his ring, the one he had never mentioned to me, and that I had found listed in the investigator's report, did not work. The lock had been changed. He called her repeatedly. She did not answer. The townhouse was in her name. The lease was in her name. Every financial arrangement they had made together existed on paper that named Vanessa Cole and no one else. Richard had handed her 2 years of planning and $276,000 and received in return a door that no longer opened for him. I did not feel triumphant about that. I want to be honest about what I actually felt, which was something quieter and more complicated. Something close to the feeling you get when you have been carrying a very heavy thing for a long time and you finally set it down and your arms do not know what to do with themselves. Daniel completed the legal separation of our remaining joint accounts over the following 2 weeks. The motion to set aside the divorce judgment was granted by the Chatham County Superior Court, which meant that the fraudulent proceeding was officially vacated and the matter of our actual divorce with full and honest disclosure of all marital assets would proceed through proper channels with both parties represented by counsel. Richard retained a lawyer. There were letters. There were negotiations that I did not participate in directly because that was what I was paying Daniel to do. I spent those weeks doing something I had not done in a long time. I sat in the garden in the mornings with my coffee and I did not think about anything in particular. I watched the cardinal that came to the back fence. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. Helen came on Thursdays and we sat on the back porch and talked about small things, ordinary things, the kinds of things that feel like luxury when you have been living inside a crisis. One morning I drove out to Tybee Island alone. I parked near the water and sat in the car for a while with the windows down. The radio came on when I turned the key. It was the same song. The one from the drive home after our honeymoon, the one I had turned off in the parking lot of the bank on Abercorn Street the morning all of this began. I did not turn it off this time. I sat and listened to it all the way through to the last note, and then I sat in the quiet that came after. Then I started the car and drove back towards Savannah. There was a great deal still ahead of me: legal proceedings, financial decisions, the work of dismantling a life that had been built for two and figuring out what the structure looked like when it was built for one. None of that was simple. None of it would be fast. But the road back to the city was clear, and the morning was bright, and I knew exactly where I was going. People ask me what I learned from all of this. I learned that trust is not the same as blindness. I trusted Richard for 39 years and called it love. What I should have done is love him clearly with both eyes open. If something in your own life feels quietly wrong, do not do what I did. Do not look away. Do not sign papers without reading them. Do not mistake someone's familiarity for their integrity. I believe God did not bring me through those weeks of silence and preparation just to leave me with nothing. He restored what was taken and gave me back something I had not expected to find at 67 myself. These revenge stories with Mom are never really about revenge. They are about women who finally stopped shrinking. The best family revenge stories end not with anger, but with clarity. I have seen what happens when a woman is pushed too far and chooses dignity over destruction, and I believe those revenge stories with Mom deserve to be told. I believe those family revenge stories deserve to be heard because somewhere out there, someone is living inside one right now and does not yet know she can walk out the other side. Every family revenge stories begins with a betrayal. Every revenge stories with mom ends with a woman who chose herself. If this story moved something in, you share it with someone who needs it today. Leave a comment telling me which moment stayed with you. And if you have not subscribed yet, there is so much more waiting on this channel. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and life lessons. If that is not for you, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find what serves you best.